And what is that you're drinking?
Oh, I have decided that fruit water is the way to go in terms of like making myself hydrate. So it has cherries, lime, and a little bit of mint in it. And I'm drinking it down like coffee. It's been so good. So my skin is glowing and fresh.
So you see a difference in terms of,
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Taking care of myself. Yeah, it's working really well.
Better than coffee.
Exactly. And I'm noticing too, it curbs my sugar intake because I'm getting more flavor. So that helps as well. I think sugar is actually the big issue for me. I have a huge sweet tooth, which with some of the stuff I do, it's a problem.
Exactly. Well, yes, of course. I forget about what you work with, right? So are you using a special bottle to hold the fruit back, or is it just all mixed in there? Or?
It's all mixed in, but it has this rubber stopper, and the rubber stopper kind of keeps certain pieces from flying out. But I try to cut them in such a way that I would have to perhaps shake them to get them out, as opposed to like, them flying into my face. It's great. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Cool.
Keeping refreshed.
Oh, right. Exactly. Well, we are live. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, Erica, I see there. I was just talking about you, actually, to Danielle. Victoria's on, and Jason from Cupertino, and Heather from Connecticut, and Miss Jojo from the San Francisco Bay Area, and Drew from Seattle. So we got all regulars in the group.
Oh, cool.
As people are starting to jump in, I noticed that our audience is growing. But if you'll let everyone know that we're going to get started here in just a minute, please use the share button underneath, or just copy and paste the URL and let everyone know we're just getting started. So Yay. Erica, I know, Erica, you're wondering what we were saying about you, but I was just mentioning that you're starting to do more environmental type as part of your challenge, kind of sort of to what Danielle is doing. Is that correct?
Right on. That's great.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It takes a while to sit there and type in. I mean, you and I have the luxury of talking, and then
yes, that's true.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, some of it is. We'll get to that in a minute.
And today, also, I want to let you guys know that Tombo has graciously sent us some packs, which is really nice. We have the mono drawing pencils and also the advanced lettering set, which I love because I love brush pens. And I'm sure
yes.
you do too. Yes. Who doesn't like brush pens? So we have 2 sets of the advanced lettering set and 2 sets of the mono pencils to give away at the end. And there's only one little catch, and I'm so sorry, Victoria, to say this, but that you have to live in the US or Canada in order to get them. Sorry. She's in Portugal. I know, sorry. Well, maybe, we'll somehow get you one. I don't know. But I know, Victoria, you use the brush pens as well, as you had shown on your crowdcast. So welcome. Yeah. You had started out as you started out with just hand lettering, brush lettering too. Is that correct, Danielle?
Kind of.
Oh, okay.
Mostly, yes. So my background was in illustration. So I learned how to tell stories. I was trying to learn how to tell stories. But it's funny, I think even back to like being a little kid, I seemed to split my time between 2 hobbies. I was either, for example, in preschool, sitting in the reading room with my book open that I couldn't read, reading stories to people. Like, just for the love of God, just looking at the photos and making stuff up.
That's all we did. We had to do that.
Yeah, like that was just important to me to share those things with others. But I was also this kid who had a massive coloring books, and anything that was blue or food, I was meticulously coloring it in. Everything else I would just abandon and go to the next page. So I think it's so weird that this is my life.
Did you say like blue?
Anything that was blue or food. Yeah.
Interesting.
It was very strange. So yes, cool. I feel like those 2 things have predisposed me to where I am now. In fact, if you would like, I can start my presentation with the screen sharing, but I have to say I wouldn't be very much like able to see things. So it's quite large.
It's okay. It's okay. So we'll get started in just one second. I wanted to ask the audience here first in terms of letter. How many people letter? How many of you are lettering artists, do calligraphy, or create environmental type? Let us know. And we already said yes. Erica does. Victoria does. Miss Jojo does.
Oh,
Yay, Tara, nice. Thank you guys for joining us. Awesome. You guys are
yes,
doing
to
lettering.
Woo!
Oh, wow. Shoto Japanese calligraphy. And then, yes, Patrick does environmental type. Yeah, so it does take some time. And we have been talking on and off about practice. And thank you, Heather. We've been talking about practice and approaches and how to get better. And we are actually kicking off a whole month of lettering. So starting with Danielle, she's going to talk about lettering, but more so type in the environment and her surroundings and how she does her amazing food typography. And then after that, we will see Matt Vergotis in 2 weeks. And then to finish our month of lettering, we have Rob Draper. And he does some interesting lettering on all sorts of objects. I don't know if you've seen his work, but it's kind of
both of them. They're great. They're fantastic.
Hi, Nikita. If you have another letterer, Nikita. Hello, guys. All right, so let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us in the Typography Dojo. I am Rachel Elner, your host, the producer of Type Ed here in Los Angeles, and I'm joined with Danielle Evans. And you are in Ohio, are you not?
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me on today. I'm so appreciative, and it's a delight to be here. Yes, from Ohio.
Yay, from Ohio. Where in Ohio are you? Strangely,
today I can say I'm from sunny Columbus, Ohio. You can never say that, but today it is quite true. It's a great city, and I don't think many people realize this. Ohio and Columbus in general was a mecca for the lettering community back in the 1900s, like old school. And I think that was in part due to its spot in the train system. It was halfway between New York and Chicago, and rail lines ran this way all the time. Pittsburgh was a massive industrial powerhouse, and Indianapolis was there, but it was around. But it's just cool that like that, the level of work that you see coming out of this area, you can see beautifully stamped vaults, incredible cash registers, like most of the old-timey fixtures, sewage drains that you see coming out that were just kind of like, I guess, mass-produced. Any artistry on them probably came from here, and usually they'll be stamped to say so. Dayton as well was also a mecca for this. So it's crazy that lettering has resurged, and so many amazing people that are doing it or incorporated into their work reside in this city. So I'm very fortunate to live here, and it's a blast. It's just a great place.
So you're probably inspired by your surrounding as well, just walking on the street.
Exactly. And it's not the way you would necessarily think either. Like, I've noticed that sometimes the best artists, or when an artist like finds their voice, really figures out what that means and is confident in it, that the way they dress, the way they present themselves, the way their home looks, all of these things are just kind of an extension of who they are, and it's all consistent. And I've learned that I live where I live because my environment is very much an extension of my work. It's very texture heavy, it's very lush, it's layered, and it has lots of meaning and intention and purpose. It's a very old area, but there are a lot of new ideas flying around all the time. And I don't know, upon further reflection, I just realized this was absolutely the right spot for me. So yes, also pulling things off of people's trees. That's very real. Sneaking into people's yards in the cover of darkness. That's another story.
That's okay. Well, hopefully no police are watching this.
Right. And if so, I'm sorry.
So at the end of the presentation, we'll be giving away some Tombow lettering sets and also pencil sets. And we are going to give them away to those who are asking the most interesting questions, and Danielle will choose at the end. So please put your put your questions underneath the tab that says questions and answers. It's just underneath our video feed. Just add them there and we will answer them at the end. Alyssa's asking, are you a CCAD alumnus?
I am not, actually. I went to school in Indiana. I went to Indiana Wesleyan. It had a very small art program, really great people there. But like all school situations that I'm running into, like my friends are talking about their experience, it seemed like it wasn't quite the right fit. It was a little overpriced, and what school was offering hadn't caught up to what the industry was demanding. And so that was a really bizarre disconnect. So it's strange always answering that question because I've not been very public about where I go to school, but yet people will be like, she went here, which is great because they wouldn't let me in. So
that's okay. You're showing them now.
It flips hair.
Education, I know. Education is just, anyhow, that's another discussion. Maybe if we have time at the end, we can get into that. But
oh my God.
I just feel like, when you're in design and you're in lettering, it's not necessarily where you go. It's your practice. It's your rituals. And so we can talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
And I think too, what's happening here with education is like the dojo, you're self-educating, you're becoming curious. So then you can figure out how to learn better or learn good. I don't know. So I think that's great. It's a great environment.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Shall we get started?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So we'll do a little bit of screen share here. Okay.
Bye, guys.
Okay, so I'll have to ask you to screen share that again. There you go.
Oh,
okay.
There. Is it up? Okay, cool.
Yep.
All right, we'll come over here.
All right.
Ooh. Actually, we'll go back. There. And I think... Ah! Oh, God!
That's
It's a screen. There we go. Okay, so hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this discussion. I wanted to talk to you today about the extraordinary strokes of genius in ordinary objects. And that sounds like a quite seizure-inducing situation over here. But what I think is so fascinating about the work that I do is after I started looking around and considering food around me, I realized that the world itself had a greater canvas available. So many of us walk through our lives and don't realize what we interact with, how we are not only affecting our environments, but are affected by the environments in which we live and the things that we handle every day. They carry such memories, they carry pain, they carry great joy. And so learning to unlock them in the way of lettering and using that in my career has been such an exciting and a really zen kind of situation. I'm excited to share it with you. Again, this strobing shift doesn't necessarily indicate how chill my job could be, but I'm excited to share this with you today. So first of all, I want to thank TypeEd for having me on. It's much appreciated. Yeah. It was like, ooh, studious things. Let's go with pencils. That sounds like fun. But I'm so excited to be here, and it's just been lovely prepping for this. So thank you so much. So I wanted to show you, and I have a feeling the sound is going to be in my ear, but I'm just going to play this and let this roll. This is kind of an offering of what I do in a slick and polished situation. This is a client video made out of seafood. And it was shown all over the properties of the Aria, which is kind of intimidating.
Danielle?
Yeah?
Can I ask you to move your mouse to the side?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, cool.
Perfect. But obviously my work didn't start there. So after slick videos like this, and in general, speaking to people, one of the first questions I get is, so how does one become a dimensional typographer? And the answer is, you go to school for illustration and you're really bad at it. That's exactly how you start. So as Rachel and I were discussing earlier, I learned how to tell stories, and I love telling stories, but that didn't necessarily mean I was great at picking which ones I wanted to tell. You'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner, a prom picture where I had all this lipstick in my teeth, which was incentivizing my learning of Photoshop. I learned very quickly how to remove lipstick from 30 photos. I started carving a baby out of a potato for a class. And it was just that moment where I gave into like, well, I'm just a weird art person now. This is just going to be my life doing crazy things. I dabbled in painting. I was clearly very bad at it. I dabbled in Illustrator. I had some skill, but you'll notice I had very poor idea execution. In particular, the bottom central image is me making a beautiful piece about twins with one heart and one mind and how they like share things. But then I thought it would be great to slap that on apparel for teenage girls right on the uterus. I don't know that was the best decision I ever could have made. And naturally, this picture on the right is just very intense, which maybe was me in my college dating years. So effectively, I was looking for this creative outlet that I didn't really find until I took a typography class, which if I may confess, it was the very last semester of school. I took it because I didn't have any more room. I couldn't get into printmaking, but I learned something beautiful. I learned that type is a way to tell subtle story. Because if you look at type, there's already a history to it. We already have ways in which we see these things utilized as long as people could hold a chisel. And therefore, I thought it was sexy and slick, but extremely subtle, and something that I wanted to capture in my messy, sloppy, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed illustration, but just didn't have a bridge for. It kind of changed my world. So then I get to the end of school and I graduate with literally this portfolio, these 5 images. This was my senior portfolio, which essentially meant go work at a coffee shop for the next 4 years and let us know how that goes. So that's what I did. I made my rounds at the mall and I cried a lot, and I felt very much like I had something to offer, but I didn't know what it was. And little did I know, all of the pieces of what I was offering were peppered through my work. You can see I can use a camera. I do have some understanding of contrast. I do have some understanding of emotion and some softness and depth, purpose, but I'm not fleshing it out. It's very awkward. I do also love using my hands as evidence with this sculpture. I just don't know what to do with it. So fast forward like 4 years, I'm crying all the time again. I'm working at the mall. I'm learning how to sell, which I'm picking up good skills, but I'm not doing very much design. I get an in-house job and I'm desperate, and it's just a terrible situation. And so I am forced into, like, I leave it and I'm forced into freelancing when I'm not ready and I don't actually want to do it. So I start looking at what freelance looks like, and I'm in this weird hybrid position of illustrator and designer when I start seeing work coming out and being applauded, and I realize all of it is multisensory. And that was kind of like a spark for me, where I realized, oh my God, like people could touch another person or engage with another person who isn't even in the same room, who doesn't necessarily speak the same language, by invoking smell, weight, touch, anything in addition to a visual experience. And so this experience that I was trying to create that was flat suddenly became more dimensional and had a context. So for example, the green book, you touch it and it's a thermal book where your hand will leave this pattern afterwards, or it's a book with a weight in it so that when you hold it, you feel the gravitas of this book of ethics, which was brilliant. And then Lickable Wallpaper by Clark Orr, who's fantastic, and just in collaboration with Mama Sauce, it's also a smellable piece, which I think is amazing. So in my case, I realized these sorts of things were what I needed, this tool of like thinking beyond just physical pen and paper was what I needed to make new work. So I sat down with a friend and I went, it's time to figure out what my life looks like and how to engage people in a multisensory way. And she's like, I'm an elementary school teacher. I don't really understand what you're saying, which is fine because I didn't either. And I said, well, I feel good design is kind of like this cup of coffee I'm holding. It's an experience that you have. It's not something you do to survive. You have heat from the cup and you have aromas in your nose, and it's just this beautiful experience that I want people to have when they look at my work. And she goes, well, that's really cool. Why don't you make something out of coffee, being a literal person? And I laughed at her initially, and then I went, you know what? That's a really great idea. So lo and behold, we have this experience where I just throw coffee grounds on the table and I mess with it with my hands. I'm not sketching, I'm not making grids, I'm not making stencils. And I realized that this is where all of these weird skill sets are coming from. They're coming into this beautiful, just kind of like perfectly imperfect, loose, open sense of lettering. And this was something I loved. And I looked at it and I went, this is finished. I don't think I've ever finished a thing in my life in terms of my artwork, and this is done. And I took a photo, I threw it on Dribble, and I went about my day. And it just blew up. It just went absolutely viral and crazy because the internet had never seen anything quite like this. No one had thought to put a typographer's touch to the items we see and use every day. Crazy. So I knew this was a good idea. I bought up a bunch of domains. I did my homework. I made sure that this was the case. And then I just went crazy. I started playing. Now, I'm going to show you this video. The sound is coming through my Bluetooth, so I'm going to be hearing myself. But I just kind of want to briefly show you my first job. My first job I got through Twitter. It was through Target, which was crazy. I just happened to contact Alan Peters, who was tweeting about hand lettering people wanting to get a paid gig. And I happened to respond to it in a time frame where he saw it. They brought me in. I did 11 pieces in 3.5 days. I got very sick, but I learned that I could work under very weird conditions, feeling ill, but I also learned that people were looking for that, and they were looking for honesty. They were looking for the imperfect, because at the time, skeuomorphism and austere Apple design of the early 2000s was still prevalent. And so this was this hard and fast turn from like pixel perfection. And I had given into the fact that that was just not something I was ever going to be able to do. So in this moment, I discovered what was to be my voice. And the crazy thing is, I didn't realize how many people would also enjoy this too. Turns out food is a shared experience. Everybody has to eat.
You're making me so hungry right now.
I'm so sorry. If you haven't had lunch, you should totally have lunch at your desk right now. This should have come with a warning. The crazy thing is, I realized people did not even have to have the same experience to appreciate the work. For example, this is one of my most shared images. It's been shared, like reblogged, something I think up to like 30 or 40,000 times, something like that. But primarily by people who have never experienced Thanksgiving, which is mind-boggling to me. Most of the world does not do that. And so it's just this crazy bewilderment that people identify with this work anyway. So let me see if this will play. Cool. So again, the weird thing about my work is what I learned was my spatial reasoning was quite high, higher than I think the common person. For example, with this particular piece, I had to do it twice. You'll notice the piece on the right was the initial one where I planted plants blindly into foam. Like I buried the foam, I planted them in, I kept standing on a stool to look at it. And I was like, oh, this looks pretty good. The highest executive to approve this decided he couldn't read it, everyone else could, so I had to make it again out of moss, in which case I had sheets of moss that I drew the letter forms backwards. I couldn't draw them from the front, so I had to do everything backwards and fill it in, which is crazy. I don't think most people would try that, but just my barrier for this thing, because it had no rules, I was writing the rules, I thought, sure, I'll give anything a shot. Why not? So that kind of brings me to my first point about working in your environment, is a lot of times we like to trick ourselves and think, well, we're designers, and therefore that means I am the master of my elements. I can do whatever is required of me. I can promise whatever. I am in charge. And really, I think design is a fancy way of saying control. I think we try to control a lot of our image, the way that we do our work, the way our work is perceived. And I don't know that that's necessarily healthy. And so working in analog has been beautiful, because I've learned that a lot of the things in our environments have restrictions. Everything does. If you consider the Noble pencil, for example, this guy had a voice, it had a tone, it was fast and quick and meant for it's just forever been meant for some sort of like blue collar, quick labor. But now it is ubiquitous, and so much so that it's almost lost its voice and is more so a vehicle for these greater ideas. When you see a pencil scrawl now, it's almost novel because so few people are using them. In the same way, the typefaces that we use on a regular basis, these have their own voice, and in some cases, deceptively so. Like the bottom middle image, it says, Anna Domini, 1925 basically is the last date. And so it's obviously not that old, but trying to give it a sense of like heritage and stateliness. I think all of the typefaces that we use in general have these very subtle voices and speak a very subtle language. So therefore, how much more do the things that we have around us, how much more do they have stories to be told? And how many of our lives are kind of moved by these items? So for example, looking here at shoelaces, one would think, should tie up in the shoe and lay completely flat. They should be perhaps done in bows. That would be really cute, maybe. But when I was doing this, for example, and also shout out to Portugal person, woo!
Victoria.
Hey! I love soccer, and something that I remember about my shoelaces was that they were often floppy, like comically so. And so when I purchased shoelaces to do this project, I wanted some that was kind of pop off the table. And in playing with it just a little bit, I realized that was something that this item needed. It required of me that it was lively and open. And so I made a game of it where I only used the laces with the exception of the very top right piece that I could fit in the shoe. So I did everything backwards again, lacing the shoe and then adjusting and then only cutting when I was positive that I could cut and have enough string, which was kind of wild. But I think the result is far more interesting and worth looking at than if I had tried to just lay them out in a certain way or like tried to force them to do something that they weren't naturally made to do. With my line of work, this can get really interesting because when I'm doing things for clients, as we saw in that first video, we have this beautiful seafood. I promised the sketch on the left, sitting here at my desk in Columbus, not knowing I was gonna have to go to Vegas to check out the property, which meant have a lot of fun and eat a lot of seafood, which was amazing, by the way, the best job. I was going to be trucked to New York to do the shoot. And so I had to guarantee that I could find the same kind of seafood in New York that I was promising on the page in Ohio. And you can only really do that if you have some understanding of seafood in general, i.e. if you eat a lot of it. So being able to promise these shapes, being able to go like skip across the country to do this crazy job and then show up promising something that looks vaguely and remotely like what I had envisioned to them is kind of mind-boggling. But it's really only something you can do if you're observational and if you are aware of the balance of promising something as you would with a pencil, but delivering on it as though you were going to use something in real life. It's a very tricky balance. So here is a quick example of a video, and I'm actually gonna just kind of show you here. So part of this is an unpublished piece. I'm doing a project right now and I'm working through the pieces. It's called Kanye, and it's Kanye lyrics made out of eggs. And you would not believe how many variations there are to do this. It's kind of weird, actually. And it's weird that I was the person to think that this is a good idea. So you'll notice the video on the left is me working for hours and hours with a friend who wanted to take a video of my process. Just went through 30, 40 eggs, bunches of egg whites, just playing with this on a skillet, trying to get the right shapes. And it wasn't until I just kind of let them be blobby and open that they were correct. And I think this kind of speaks to the irreverence of Kanye, but is also like artful and feels like it has some sense of skill. Also, you'll notice I've grown a lot of work, strangely, literally. I grew this particular set of pieces from rock candy, which you have to let sit for a while. Originally, I saw 2 weeks, but I found a super saturated sugar solution that allowed me to sit these things down. They grew for 4.5 hours, and I kept coming in to check on them. But inevitably, I was able to kind of grow this in a pattern that I wanted, which, by the way, I did 3 different control pieces. This is the one that turned out the best. And my final vision was to have it sitting on a model. So when I collaborated with Nick Fancher, the photographer, shot this, we were constantly trying to find the right angles, making sure we had good shadow. And then I also did a little bit of post retouching to make sure that this was on point. But the point being, sometimes my work itself is merely a portion of the final. It's a vehicle for a greater idea, which I think is some of the strongest work. Now, the downside to something like this is maybe working in real life, you end up having to go back to fix some mistakes. You'll notice the image on the left is the first image, and it's got all kinds of glue all over it. We weren't shooting this project where I could see the finals as he was shooting. That's called tethering. Instead, I just got these images and went, oh shit, like the necklace is not quite correct. It pulled and there's glue all over this. I need to make adjustments. And it took me a few days to do that. So I'm tattling on myself, showing you. But effectively with a job like this, you end up becoming a bit of an art director, a bit of a retoucher, a bit of a photographer, a stylist, and a designer, on top of like some really weird person who runs around in Ninja Turtle knee pads all day. So because I'm working in real life, I'm also often working in strange locations. This happened to be the coldest day of the year that I chose to work at the baseball park. But I was super determined to get this piece together for the Seattle Times, so it just had to be done. But part of the beautiful things of working in an environment is that you're also affected by the environment. And in a lot of cases, it's a great thing. For example, the best and worst part of my job is the free smells. There are so many free smells to have, and some of them are disgusting, like rotting seafood, old meat. Some of them are torturous, like I had a job this past week where people were cooking bacon, but the bacon was 5 days old and it had been sitting out. So they're like, it's going to smell amazing, but do everything you can not to put it in your mouth. So that's a strange situation. Or doing things out of flowers where the whole shoot, you're bent over, so your back is kind of breaking a little bit. It's hot out, but at the same time, there's this wonderfully floral smell in your face. And basically everything ends up being all right in the end. Now, also, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I get to work with crews, which means we often have dance parties. Lots of white guys enjoying themselves. Oh God. I think it's just so much fun actually being able to work with amazing professionals who not only are supplementing what you are doing, but they're taking great joy out of your contribution and they're shining in their own way. It's kind of like having a rock band or being in an art department where everybody knows what they're doing and there's no more bullshit. So working on set is something that I have never thought I would be doing, but I knew I was a little too friendly and a little too interested in other people to be cloistered into a studio for days on end. So this is a wonderful perk of my job as well. So also, one of the things that I'm trying to incorporate forever into my work are layers, and not just literal layers as with this cheese, but layers of purpose and meaning. I feel like anyone can ornament anything truly, but to have work that is thoughtful and intentional, that is a staple of what I do. So in some cases, it's irreverent. This is one of my favorite Tina Fey quotes. And would you believe it took 3 days to really figure out how candy corn works? And getting everything to line up concentrically seemed to be the best way to do it. I also tend to limit how much stuff I use. I think less is more, or in this case, less is more. So I love it when my clients are also thinking in the same way. For example, this was for Garden and Gun. And it's Garden and Gun is a Southern magazine, and they use Windsor, which is an amazing typeface for the Biscuit King. And I encourage you to go look at this on my Instagram, because naturally I had to throw a bunch of classical music on it when I destroyed it. I feel like just having this very full experience is an exciting and fun way to engage with people who aren't able to be on set, for example, for the work that I'm doing. And something I started realizing is that my voice that I had cultivated and developed with this purpose could also be used to cultivate and elevate other people's voices. For example, I'm not Islamic. Ramadan is right now. Ramadan Mubarak, everyone, if you're celebrating. But I just thought it would be a really beautiful thing last year to kind of do a piece that spoke to fasting and spoke to peace and goodness. And strangely, it was around the same time as like the Paris shootings and bombings and And that was so devastating. And so a lot of people thanked me for doing this. And I just realized that it is not difficult. It takes so little to reach out and touch somebody who you don't necessarily identify in an ideological manner. Just proving that you care, proving that you wish them well, that can be enough. And I think that is when I started to look into the layers and the power that food had to really move people. So holy shit, right?
That was a beautiful piece, Danielle. Loved it. Love it.
Thank you. And so naturally, I have to get a little bit tongueier and cheekier, if that's a phrase I can use. I feel like because some of the world events are becoming more and more pointed, it only makes more and more sense to apply that kind of clever snark to commenting on it. I'm not usually a political person. I couldn't avoid flaming hot Cheeto. Thank you, Vice, for the perfect quote. So now I see this tug of war between the lettering community in general. And it's very interesting watching how this plays out in my particular world as more and more people are becoming interested in becoming dimensional typographers or environmental typographers. There seems to be a struggle between preservation and Impressionism. I find that most people who tend to hold to a preservational manner of thinking, they are historically minded, they're more scholarly, and I think that's fantastic. I think some of the best and most beautiful work coming out of our time will be that kind of work that's reminiscent of Gaslight, work that's reminiscent of, I guess, like Saul Bass and other people that are doing these beautiful, like, vintage 60s style retro throwbacks. Those things will be lauded and celebrated because they breathe new life into these well-honored and time-honed traditions. But for myself, I tend to be more of an impressionist in the sense that I like to let the materials I'm working with dictate the way that I'm using them. So yes, in some ways I will be looking at more like Lubalin scripts and whatnot, or Edwardian scripts, but I'm also very keen to the fact that I'm using them in a way that makes sense for the material, which, by the way, and I'm sorry if I can't say that, I hate confetti. Confetti is the worst. It's like a disease. It gets everywhere, and if you're sweaty, it's just over, and everybody wants it to spot or sparkle and to pile up. It doesn't really do any of that without a ton of extra lighting and a ton of extra post work. So it's just a wild experience. But it's something where I've learned I have to be mindful about how that sits together. I also have a little challenge for myself. If I am ever working in a material that I've used before, for example, humble pie is the very first pie I made, and I've since made several. I try to up the ante every time in terms of how I'm using these materials. I try to do more interesting and more complex type as I feel more comfortable with what I'm using. It would be like a person who uses the computer, switching programs, or going to a pen, or going to a brush pen, going to a Tombow, going to a dip pen, going to pencil or Conte crayon, like all of those things, just constantly back and forth. Most people do not switch materials, and I switch every single day. So anytime I have the opportunity to do something that I've done before, I always want to elevate it a little bit. I see it as a way to not only impress myself, which I think matters more than anything, but to impress then other people or my clients to get myself better and better work. So when I'm new to something, I typically play a little safer just because I need to be able to execute to a professional level in some capacity. So I'm always working. Oh, hey, why is this here? Oh. Anyway, I like things to be suggested. I like them to feel like they just happened. And in this case, I don't see people using paper like this very often. But I think paper has its own subtle beauty if you're paying attention to the way light works, which I think as an illustrator is part of how I've come to this understanding. And even now I see myself dabbling a little bit in the idea of skeuomorphism. So observing how brush strokes work and noting that I now use brush pens and things with more proficiency than I did when I first started, I can take those techniques and those observations into the physical world. Again, leeks were really interesting to me. I've never eaten one, to be fair, but they're beautiful. And so I was really curious about whether or not I could come up with some sort of like an interesting, irreverent script. I think this worked very well. So, and again, trying to mix ideas. Everybody's like, never make gift wrap serif lettering. Just don't do it. Everybody will hate you. Everybody will hate you that's helping you. It will be extremely hard to unwrap, but this idea of marrying kind of an older type with a newer treatment seemed to be something that was exciting and could give a little bit of life to serifs and different elements that we see in a more traditional sense. I also find that while I'm not looking at specific typefaces, I'm never looking at specific typefaces. And in fact, I rarely take photos of things. I like to let my mind think on how things should change or look. I noticed that one of the things that I've lacked in and have struggled to become better in has been layout. Layout is so important. And it is that much harder to execute a layout because it's that much more time invested. I mean, all these little elements, these swoopy things, took upwards of like 6 hours to create this entire piece on my knees, on concrete floor, all day long. So it's very much a labor of love, but it's something where when the message is true, and in this case, particularly potent because I got divorced this year, this was kind of like a healing piece for me to really play through those feelings and those emotions and to just kind of pour myself into it. And I think that was evident in the response that I received. Not much response, but very thoughtful from other people. So now it's also a question of what can one do when one is experimenting with these new things? How can we up the ante even further off a tabletop? And in this particular case, I was asked to do a mural, an edible mural, which probably broke 1,000 health codes, but it happened. Also, I should note, I go into my projects with a healthy sense of not understanding how to do them. And in this case, I vaguely remembered taking an interior design class in school and realized I could build elevations to communicate to the client, send to the builder, and hopefully somehow get this project built. And look at it getting built. How crazy is that? All of these, I had assistants and friends like running to their local donut place because I knew it was the donut place that we were going to use. And I'm like, tell me how wide the diameter is. This is super important of the whole. I need to know how big these donuts are. The girls putting this project together, they're like, we want to change the guacamole end. We want to make the little cups like 2.5 ounces instead of 3 ounces. Do you think that's going to be a problem? And I'm like, that's going to be a huge problem. That's a significant amount of space. And it was the most type A I've ever been in my life. But the point being, it eventually became not just a tabletop experience, as is a lot of my work, but it became almost in a way a mural or a poster where people could engage at it from 5 feet back and read it. They could get up close to it and observe like the varieties of things, and they could also eat it. So they're very intimately touching it. And let me tell you, people ran away with that parsley. I could not believe it. South by was apparently not a place for free food, which is what I thought it was. So that's interesting. Very trying times down there. But this became a centerpiece and a backdrop for several shows that were shot, several events in the space. And it showed me that food is only going to become more immersive as time progresses. In the same way that VR has become immersive, people will want to engage in a more fevered pitch and in a more intensely thoughtful way with the work that with the things that they put in their bodies. So anyway, this is kind of dark, and it's also a direct quote from The Mummy, but I love it. Death is only the beginning. In some ways, like I mentioned before, watching a relationship die or watching your pieces fail, watching them separate and fall apart kind of lends to a different way of thinking about the end. In which case, stop motion became a very interesting component of my work. Originally, I was doing these things called type wipes, basically, or Wednesday wipes, where I was just wiping things. And I found it to be so cathartic because it meant, A, I could always make something new. The work that I had done was not the best it was ever going to be. It was only going to get better because there was more to, the world is so large. There are so many things to use. And so initially this was jarring to my clients. A lot of people asked to put stuff under glass. I'm like, no, you're killing the vibe. We can't do that. it was just nice to be present-minded and to recognize that the work that I do is made for myself, made for the people involved, and then made for posterity only by a photo or a video. That was very freeing because it didn't make me worry about how I would feel about this stuff later. I was never concerned about my legacy, and I'm still not truly, but it's been really beautiful seeing how people want to use it and transform it into an art form. So that was the very first stop motion video that was done with, as far as I know, this kind of work. And so naturally it pushed me to look at doing my own. That was animated by one of the gentlemen who's worked on Fantastic Mr. Fox and the Box Trolls and various Leica movies. So I didn't feel like I could call myself a stop motion animator by any means. I had seen the best. However, I thought there was a really interesting component to this that we hadn't quite fleshed out yet in this community. So I started playing around with, again, these layers of sugar skulls, and this very pleasantly morbid look at death. And again, other elements, like other objects, were not immune to this either. I thought that there was a lot of opportunity to be had in playing with speed and just tongue-in-cheek realizing that the work that we do, all of it, whether it is on the computer or in real life, is impermanent. And therefore, we have to be cognizant and intentional with everything we do, because who knows when our last project will be. Oh, that happened. Well, I guess that was my last slide. Anyway, I don't know why that was, but the end.
Okay.
Oh my God. That's weird. Anyway.
Was that supposed to be your last slide, or you?
No, I had one more in there, but I don't know what happened to it. So
it's okay. All good. Anyway, all good.
The point being that, like, we put purpose to the things that we do, and we put purpose to the beauty of our work. And I think because the work I do exists in real life, it never actually stops, because again, I can be walking down the street and pull a bowl of a 5 off a tree. And I feel like in some ways that 5 grew there for me. It spent a lot of time developing and growing for someone to notice it and care about it. And so I think this kind of work requires maybe not attention, but it requires the mindfulness and the presence to develop it into something more beautiful, to suggest the world that we live in rather than dictate how the world works. I think if we're all honest, when we pass on from here, people might remember us maybe a couple generations out if we're lucky, but really the way we impacted people in this time is what matters the most. And so I think that kind of mindfulness is just present for me every day, because that's the nature of how I have to work to be able to sleep at night. And I kind of love it, so.
Thank you, Danielle. That was amazing work. I haven't seen a lot of that, so it was just beautiful. And I actually wrote down a ton of questions on my end.
Oh,
but there are so many questions that are coming in. And just wanted to warn you, if you have anywhere to go right afterwards, I don't think we're going to stay within our hour at this moment. So
sorry, guys.
if that's okay with you guys. Okay, so let's jump into the questions. And then if there's anything that you guys did not cover that I have, that is literally, I mean, I have a ton of questions here, so I'll jump in. Thank you so much. So let's start on the questions, if that's okay with you, Danielle.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'm so glad you guys voted these up.
Yeah.
I love that, the ones that you guys share. Yeah. Okay. So Carly's asking, do most of your clients have a limited budget? How do you sell them on the idea of production cost-heavy pieces?
Well, that is a great question. That is a great question, deserving of a TAZO.
Okay. Choosing them already. Okay. Let's wait till the end. Okay. So I'll put down Carly's first, but go ahead.
Of course. So here's the beauty of the way that I work. I started Scrappy. My first that Kraken GIF that I had. Oh no, Rachel's gone.
That's okay.
I'm here. There you go. That Kraken GIF that I have where I'm wiping it away, that was actually done on top of a trash can. That was my first studio, was on a trash can next to my desk. So I've made no pretense about what I do. Like right now, this is my studio, which would be a dining room in most people's houses. It's open, and usually this table is not here. My closet over here, all of my photo equipment is collapsible. I run a very resourceful just setup, and it's very agile. Sometimes I have interns, sometimes I have assistants, but none of them directly work for me. It's just me doing this work. So I found by being scalable in that way, yes, my clients always have a limited budget on what they're willing to pay. And I've done a very good job of eyeballing and going, okay, I think I need about this much, we'll say like 3 boxes of flour or 2 cans of whipped cream or whatever it is. And so then my clients will say, okay, well, we're going to order an extra 5 just to be safe. That's someone freaking out about numbers, and I just let them do that. But generally, my projects can come in as high as, the mural I did came in around $3,000 for materials. And that was because we were refilling it every single day, 4 times a day for different people. So that was crazy. But on the low end, my jobs are typically, I use food in a lot of ways because it's cheap and because I can eat it afterwards. And sometimes that's the best. And other times it's like eating stale sugar all day. And I'm like, God, I'm 50 pounds. What I've learned is that if you start yourself in a way where you can grow and shrink and grow and shrink, you have longevity, and you also have better ideas because you're limited by what you don't have. Like you're limited to this less is more mentality where you're kind of skewing this fine line between ornamentation and minimalism. And I think somewhere right in between, at least for me, is where I like to live, where it's enough. And that's typically how I deal with my budgets. But we let people know sometimes it can be, we'll ask for like 300 and then we'll just tell them if we get close to that, and then they'll bill me out for what I actually spent. Or sometimes they'll give a flat, like it's 500 for supplies, and then I'll just get all 500 regardless of whether or not we use it. It's really a matter of what they agree to, but most people are super flexible. And in fact, kind of a dovetail to that, I've noticed my clients really enjoy being on set, and their feedback is so much better because they see me on the ground. Like for the first 10 minutes, everyone's freaking out. They're taking videos. They're like, yeah, this is so cool. Oh, she's like really just doing the thing. And then 15 minutes later, they're watching cat videos and checking emails and running around the office getting water, and I'm still sweating and dying on the floor making this thing. But they come back and their feedback isn't like, could you move this? Could you like adjust that baseline for us real quick? It's just real fast, because they know it's not real fast. In some ways, having them there is enough to educate them, and they respect that they couldn't do it. And so our communication is much stronger. So where most people would be like, oh, don't come in here, I'm like, please come in here. Maybe not to my house, but like, you know, to a designated studio of our choosing, to like neutral ground for our gangs.
Right.
So
and that works when you're doing environmental type like you are. I mean, if I invited a client to sit over my shoulder and watch what I'm doing, I think it would drive me nuts. So,
and I think in some ways people have more understanding of what that is. They have more understanding of Photoshop. They're like, oh, I put my friend's face on their dog. Like that's not fair. That's not fair to anyone.
Right. Okay, Kylie, I hope that answers that question. I mean, they have to be your clients have to be very flexible on the cost, because I can understand that, you know, your materials, the lettering is going to expire after a while, right? Yeah. So Nikita is asking, what is the strangest everyday object that you have ever worked with or drawn on?
Oh man. I feel like the weirdest one is cat litter. That was a weird thing. It was for this product for Purina, and it was for 20 to 30-year-old women who live alone, but they're like internet savvy and they have a Tumblr. So they were trying to get me to say all these really crazy things, which I was all about. It was super weird. I was all over it. But at one point they're like, we're going to make like Secret Garden, which is one of our smells, and we're going to have you make that out of soil. And I went, are we? Are we sure about that? And then at one point halfway through the shoot, they're like, we're going to nix the soil. It kind of looks like poo. Like, yeah, but I mean, you had to get there. So It was just a really weird situation working within that environment, and having people, very like serious account people, being like, does this look like cat shit? I think it does. What do you think? We should ask Joan in accounts. Like, it's just very, very weird.
Nice.
So, I mean, that stuff's fun.
Thanks, Nikita, for asking that great question, of course. Sherilyn is asking, if you could put a message on a billboard, what would it be?
Oh man, that's such a question. Sherilyn, what are you doing? I could tell you one I would put on my tombstone. Somebody asked me that once in an interview, and I thought it was kind of morbid and very, it was very Scandinavian. It was for someone in Sweden, but I realized it was a great question. They asked me what I would say, and I would probably have someone write "She came, she left" out of something on a flat, like, tomb, no marker, and then it would just blow away or dissipate as it would, just because I feel that's pretty indicative of how I'm trying to do things.
Yeah, your work is very temporary and very ethereal, so that would make sense, right?
Thank you.
Okay, excellent, cool. Victoria is asking, do you draw everything from scratch on paper first, or do you rely on some typefaces for your projects?
I almost never use typefaces. The only time I will use them is if I'm directed to. For me, it's very important that I maintain my sense of my voice, and that doesn't mean that I'm ignorant or unschooled, but it means that when I look at things, I try not to go looking for the source and then delving into the source. Again, that's more of a historical perspective, and a preservationist perspective, which again, I think is super valuable. I know people who do it and do it very well, but for me, I want to make sure that if I'm going to co-sign onto someone else's voice, like their work, that I have enough understanding of where my voice starts and ends. Like, to me, that's very important. And I think they can mix and be very beautiful and very different. I see it happen all the time. But for me, that's just a very fine line of, I've always been fearful that if I did use someone's work incorrectly, I was going to get a knock on the door and it's like, oh, hey, it's Jessica Ish. What are you doing? And like, crying, you know, throws everything away, becomes an accountant. And I think that's just a personal thing where I have a very strong sense of self, or looking for self. And so I want to honor that in other people, you know.
Got it. Okay. Victoria, I hope that helps. And Marina is asking, how much of your work would you say is more organic versus strategic?
Ooh, so actually both. Yes. What I've learned is I manage the very few variables I have control over, and I make them constant as I can. So when other variables come in, I can handle them better. For example, I've had several jobs where the surface I've worked upon has been damaged by the materials I was using. Like, I used butter for a project and we shot it on marble, and the marble was stained. Really ugly grease stains formed while I was working, and so I had to go more quickly. Everyone was nervous, and then at the end they're like, we don't think we can actually Photoshop this out. They could, but it was going to take a very long time. So we had to scrap it and do something else. And so I had to start from scratch, same idea, same execution, because I sent client sketches and they approved them, and then somehow find a way to make it work, which thankfully it was during the polar vortex, so I kept working with butter, which already is extremely difficult to work with. You touch it, you get maybe a couple minutes and your skin is melting it everywhere. I was running it outside of the polar vortex, standing in the frigid cold, just going like this, and everybody's offering to hold open the door, and I'm like, that's fine. And then walking it back inside when it was cold until we had something on a wooden surface that wasn't going to be affected. So that was great. But I think as much as possible, I'm doing tests. In a lot of cases, people will ask me to work with products I've never worked with. And so in order to put everyone at ease, I build into my budget a test period. They can use it or not. Last week I did some work, or 2 weeks ago I did work for John Frieda. They do white girl hair care products. And my whole house smelled like fake strawberries. It was great, sort of. But they were a great client and they sent me all this stuff. And so I'm sitting there trying to like draw. They had reference material for very swirly, scripty kind of lettering, because they were trying to harken to like beautiful redheaded locks, and then really aggressive, almost like brush pen kind of styles for the brunette stuff, saying never be dull. And that was tricky because they had a feeling and they had copy, and they also had the material. And usually someone has the material first and then no copy, and I have to help figure that out, or they have copy but no material, and I have to figure out what we're going to use and what kind of lettering treatment it'll have. So a lot of this work is surprisingly very strategic, but you have to be super open to people taking too long on their feedback and it possibly affecting the half-life of the stuff you're using, or you have to be thoughtful about how the weather is acting outside. Is humidity appropriate or helpful? It's constantly just thinking about all these things, but I've realized it's a benefit because when I am asked by clients for kind of a brief or a proposal about what kind of stuff I want to show or share, I can answer everything for them up front. I can say, if this happens, I'll do this. If this happens, I'll do this. Or I've already thought of this thing. And I think most people do not expect artists to be so thorough. And that's been a huge advantage in how my work has worked. So now I not only have the experience, but I will take whatever experience I don't have and figure it out before I get to executing for the project. And you can't buy that. Well, you can, but from
It's a lot of trial and error.
Mm-hmm, exactly. But you have to be okay with failing. You absolutely have to. And if you're not, the beautiful thing is I have failed in front of clients several times, like just utterly failed. I've spelled things wrong. Materials didn't work the way I wanted them to. I didn't love the treatment that I had. And so in some cases I'll be like, could you leave me alone for a minute? And then I'll wipe everything and just start over. In some cases it's just better to do that. You just have to be okay with the fact that it is going to come to a conclusion, but something much better will come out of it. And I don't think you can take those kinds of risks if you're not fully committed to the fact that it is okay to fail, because out of that failure, you've learned something, and that learning can be applied to something more.
Oh my God, I love that. That's great. Thank you. So I hid myself so we could see what's happening behind you. Or what are you working on? A piñata there, yeah? Or no?
It's a piñata. So I made this and finished it not too long ago. I started it a year and a half ago because I was angry one day and I went to Target and I stood and I went, $20 for a piñata? What if I want to beat something to death? I can make it for cheaper. So I did, and I haven't had the heart to break it. It even has candy in it.
Oh my gosh, mass produce that. I want one.
It's so cool. Let me see if I can grab it. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Oh my God. Oh my God, that's awesome. Party. Sweet.
Yeah. Oh, you can read it. That's good. Some people haven't been so fortunate. Yes. So very.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about readability, but first of all, so we're going over an hour. Are you okay with that? And if so, if not, how many questions do you want to answer? Because we already still have 7 in the queue.
Oh my goodness. I can answer some more. Sure. I'm good until 4 o'clock. So.
Okay. So let's just keep jumping through, and then I can, if there's no questions about readability, I will ask you here at the end. So Erica is asking, what is next for you? Your work keeps getting more challenging, adding new elements. Do you have larger scale ideas that you want to try?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. And yes, I do. So one of the things that I did for my birthday this year, I turned 30, and like any 30-year-old, I put on a VR headset, as one does, trying to reevaluate the world. And it kind of changed how I feel about design in general. So I could talk at length about this because it's just crazy to me. If any of you have ever put on an Oculus, the program and software is such now where you're able to move around. So I was just like, I was having a time of it. I was so excited. But I learned that like you're disembodied. You do not see any part of you unless that's been programmed in, which is crazy because now the things that you see, the artwork flying at you, the creatures or whatever, can get very close to you and you have no sense of barrier of self. So the environment becomes that much more impactful. So I got out of this thing and went, holy shit, this is going to change everything. But not like, obviously it will change everything in a virtual sense, but it is going to be augmented that much more in the real world. So people like us who are designing, for example, for experiences, for conferences, for large scale installs, that people are going to demand that much more out of your ideas, out of their ability to interact with it. I've had several things that I've done where I've gone to concerts and put up lettering out of records, and people ran to the wall and drunkenly or maybe soberly tried to pull it off. And my first response was, fuck that! And my second response, which was the better response, was there must be a way to reward someone for going up to do this because enough people are doing it. Why am I going to tell them to stay away? Or going to the museum and hearing like little kids getting smacked because their moms are like, don't touch artwork, can't bring you anywhere. Like that is awful. Everybody's proximity to art is always away. And I feel like with VR and the way that it's moving, it's not accessible for everybody right now. But for people working in maybe augmented reality or just regular reality, you have a chance to bring people near and close and to touch them and to push empathy and to move someone. And I think that is valuable. And I think if we figure out how to do that now, in my case, working with a couple sensor developers, new people outside of the industry, I've spoken with some chocolatiers about some things, like just constantly trying to find new people, fresh blood and fresh ideas. Fashion industry and the music industry are interesting to me. I think there's a lot of movement in those ways. So those are kind of directions and people I'm talking to right now, because I fully believe that we will have to write those rules in order to keep relevant. And we will also have to write them because society will demand them of us. So I would not be surprised if in 5 or 10 years, the design elements that everyone learns in school will be changed to include proximity. I think proximity is going to become a huge new paradox and or a paradigm shift.
It sounds like you're going to be on the very cusp of it, so that's kind of cool.
I hope so. If everything turns out and all these pitches do what they're supposed to, that would be really cool.
Awesome. I hope that helps, Erica. Miss Jojo is asking, when you work that fast, how do you take care of your hands?
God, that's a good question. I have to be much more conscious of listening to my body now. So something I've done, I've had a friend who is a chiropractor who will take care of my hands for me after a job. I'll soak them sometimes in ice water. That's really helpful. And I always, yeah, exactly. It's a very lucky friend. But I find in general, that's typically my time to stop for a little bit. Like typically when my hands are that tense, I'm also stressed. It's indicative of a larger problem. And so that is usually the point where I'll walk away and go take a walk somewhere, go get a coffee, just try to like give myself an opportunity to ease up, or I'll go run or play soccer at the park. So just listening to your body and learning when you have to make that shift into another activity can be really refreshing. And in some cases I come back with better ideas, and that's a much better move. But when I'm focused and I'm working, I mean, it's like savant where I'm not paying attention to anything people have to remind me to eat. I feel like a lot of people have this too, this intense flow state, which is wonderful in its own sense.
Yeah, great. So yes, you are a type performer and an athlete. Carly is asking, any tips or tricks for getting a good shot of your work when you're jury rigging everything at home with limited lighting, space, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Carly with those questions. So I've learned foam core is your best friend. It's a fantastic thing. It's super cheap and it can be broken and cut and whatever in all kinds of sizes. I mean, half the stuff in my closet is just foam core. I've learned shooting into a window is fantastic, extremely helpful. So if you shoot into a window and then subsidize it with a tinier little strobe light, that can be really helpful. I have a very crappy camera setup. It's so bad. Like bad lighting, I should say. I don't even have like a real tripod. It's a C-stand with a Manfrotto like steel arm. So that means it's like this giant thing, just kind of teetering precariously on this tiny little stand that's supposed to be used for cute things like lights and bouncers. And I'm just, throwing my camera on it, which is very, very heavy. I need to get that fixed soon. But I find too, shooting into the ceiling, if you have extra lights, like my ceilings are painted flat white. And I learned this from Henry Hargreaves, who's a photographer who also does type and food, but he comes at it as being a photographer primarily and then secondarily using these things. And even just that variation makes for extremely different work. And it's really cool. I love the stuff. But he gave a Skillshare class where he was shooting into the ceiling, and that just makes this umbrella a very soft, completely like perfect lighting. So if you have white ceilings. Mine are about 8 inches or 8 feet high. 10 actually. That's even enough to get like a really cool just band, and I can shoot in complete pitch blackness and it looks like I'm shooting in daylight. So that helps.
Wow. That's cool. Okay. Thank you, Carly, for asking that. Another question from Carly. I assume that you have enough experience now that you don't have to chase too much work. But early on, how did you convince clients of the value of this type of work, since they've likely never saw it before? And P.S. Thank you for being able to show clients what you're doing may excite my future clients about alternate lettering approaches.
Yay! Well, it's cool because for the most part, thankfully, no, you're allowed to have questions. For the most part, I have found people were just so excited about it. They're like, what is happening? Just tell me what's even happening here. Like, we kind of have a project, but I don't really understand, and just tell me what you're doing. And so having that opportunity to explain my work, I got very proficient in explaining it. And it turns out that's kind of the biggest problem that artists have. Like, we just sit around and go, I'm self-conscious. Well, I don't know what to say. That doesn't help anybody. So if we are in a position where we feel like we have some mastery over what we're doing, be it mastery or not, and can explain to people, look, I'm going to take all this stuff out of this box, I'm going to dump it on the ground, and then we're going to make letters out of it. And they'll look like these sketches I sent you last week. And they'll be like, oh, okay. I mean, just even that was enough. I think I got a lot of early adapters initially, people who were excited about this novel thing. Last week, I had what I would call my milestone client, meaning if they ever approached me, it meant I needed to start shifting very quickly into different kinds of work, which I already have been in this past year, so I'm early. But it was McDonald's. So I did a bunch of work for them last week. Super cool. Very excited about that project. But they are kind of like this is going mainstream soon. So if it goes mainstream, that means more and more people are going to be rushing to do this, more people will understand it, and hopefully that also means more jobs will be opening up. Right. So if that's the case, then it's like, oh, this really cool funnel of opportunity. So I think it's possible. I was told initially when I started doing this that I maybe had 2 years to do it. I have 4.5 now, and I don't see it necessarily abating anytime soon. So be super encouraged. I think just having context, like giving clients context and having the courage to give them context is enough to inspire more work opportunities.
I think it helps us all as lettering artists, type designers, anyone working with type to actually educate clients and tell them what they're looking at, why they're looking at it, and why it's important. So I think it helps all of us. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Carly. Heather is asking, you are obviously very passionate about and love what you do. What are some aspects of your work that you don't love so much or even dislike beyond the messiness of working with food or weather conditions you mentioned?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I always feel like an ass. I always feel like an ass because I love talking about my work so much in a positive way, but I feel like I got to bring it down sometimes, like it's not all like roses. It's kind of shitty sometimes. Occasionally just how much effort goes into something. Like, for example, I see like lots of lettering people doing the Instagram game where they're posting every single day. And it's cool that they can do that, but it's very hard to do that with this line of work. And I feel like if you're doing that with this kind of work, your message is going to suffer, your execution is going to suffer. And so there's always that pressure of like, hey, you need to post every day. You need to get your stuff out. People need to see you working. It's like, well, I'm trying to be of the mindset that when I'm working and when I'm showing people what I'm working on, that it's quality. Quality always first.
Right.
And I think that is indicative of the fact that I'm now somewhere mid-career or on my way to mid-career, because I know at the beginning you can't really afford to do that. You have to just crank stuff out all the time. But I think too, the processes were simpler. It was like working with pulverized substances, for example, that's my bread and butter. I get asked to do that all the time, and it's the first stuff I learned with. So spices, coffees, flowers can take 20 to 40 minutes. That's it. That's crazy in terms of like just execution time, and lighting is pretty fast on that too. So I could be done in a couple hours maybe, including retouching. But yeah, nowadays it's more intense, it's more complex, and In some cases, my jewelry project took like a month and a half.
Oh,
yeah.
And getting into your mid-career, you also become more of a curator of your own work. So you do have to pick and choose and not go by, put something out every day, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why you haven't seen much of the stuff that is in this presentation that I gave today, just because I'm like, that was okay, or I'm kind of beyond that. Or I have my favorites, and I realize my favorites are not always crowd favorites, and that's a strange thing too, like divorcing yourself from your work enough to be like, oh, this is, someone else would prefer a different thing, you know?
Right. Yeah, you have to do that if you're going to work with clients. Oops, I'm sorry. So Carla is asking, how do you choose the lettering style and materials for a piece? It's a great last question.
And that's a great question. Yeah. So typically I like to think of my ideas in tandem with each other. I typically prefer to have, like for example, this Kanye project I've been working on, I was like, over easy out of over easy eggs. That makes a lot of sense. I feel like it's going to be drippy because eggs are generally runny and gross. And so in thinking through that, I realized that there was only one way to do it, truly. Or another facet of that Kanye project that I shared on my Instagram was a Kanye egg, where I carved an emu egg, just carved an egg and it says Kanye on it. It's crazy. I don't know what I'm doing. But I sat there and I went, okay, well, I definitely want this to be something that feels kind of lush and exciting. And I think end game, I want to bedazzle this egg and put it on a chain. So it's like a diamond encrusted piece. Like that's what I want. It's very weird. But I recognize I don't really know what those look like. Like I know what they look like, but I don't. I need to go study diamond encrusted pieces. I did a project earlier this past year where I had to go study tramp stamps, and I didn't absolutely hate all of them. And I questioned myself for a long time after that. But like, getting a sense of why things are chosen and what materials, like why materials are the way they are. I do a lot of work with ribbon. Ribbon for me always has to be flouncy. Some of it is up on its side to give really thin contrast and do really beautiful scripts. And then other pieces have to be very like flat. So you're getting that sense of movement and thick to thin variation. It's really important for it to feel artful. And I don't think you can do that until you've played with these things a little bit. But I'm always amazed too. I do workshops all the time where I teach people how to kind of do these things and how to play and just generally find a way to think about things outside of the computer, and they come away from it just being fantastic. I think more and more people could honestly do this, and with great proficiency and with a great sense of like voice and personal experience added in. Like so many people have touched gum in the way that I would never think to touch gum, or buttons. I'm always amazed what people do with M&Ms, because to me it's like, oh, you just line them up in a line, and I mean that looks dumb, but okay. But so many people don't do that, and I don't, I don't get it, but it's great. I just feel like in the same way that we use different kinds of lettering treatments because of maybe where we come from or our background or what we're predisposed to, in some cases like our genders or whatever, in the same way I think we also use the items around us based on those experiences. And I think those are the most powerful versions. There was a piece that I was looking for to put in the talk and I couldn't find it. I think it's only on my Instagram, that says empty nest. I didn't do it. A woman at my workshop did. It's on a black piece of paper and it's with maybe 20 sprinkles. They're all the same color and it just looks kind of sad. It looks like darkly comedic. And I asked her about it and she's like, oh yeah, I'm an empty nester. My kids aren't in the house anymore. You know, you can't buy Pop-Tarts anymore. And I was like, oh, that's okay. But then I pressed her later when we were alone and she told me that her daughter had died tragically in an accident in a swimming pool last year. And so she's like, I'm really sad about this. Obviously, I miss her every day, but I also have her friends who are now my kids, and I've been adopted into their world. And I'm now like, where I had one child and it's gone, I now have many children. Mm-hmm. And so it was this really beautiful, like, I was like, you have dust in your eye. You know, it was so moving. And I thought that was just an incredible circumstance and story of how someone could take tragedy and really elevate and rise out of that tragedy with this kind of work. I think there's so much still to be done in that way. So I'm excited to see what other people do. And I know that other people have the capacity to make these kinds of crazy decisions and calls. And even with the same prompt, it would be completely different from mine.
It could be very cathartic working with physical materials. And I also think that your work, in your line of work, you're more of an art director. I mean, when in terms of choosing lettering style and materials, it has to go with the concept, right? So there has to be a brief, that has to be an idea. And that's basically with the materials and the concept. And so
Exactly. Or you have to provide the concept, which I think is almost scarier because it's much easier to have someone else tell you what to do. But if you feel confident in the fact that you can push these things, it changes everything. I've been pushing clients a lot more this year because I feel like I can, and they're letting me, which is wild. I think it shows them I'm more invested, which I didn't think was going to happen. I thought they would see it as challenging, but yeah, I love that.
It's good.
So
it's good. And especially if you pull those concepts from yourself, like you just said, it makes it much more profound for the audience. That's just my point. Yeah. Okay.
That's
so I know you guys have been waiting for an hour and 20 minutes. You
guys are great. Thank you.
I know. I have questions, but I'm going to ask her after we do the giveaway because you've been waiting for your pens and your pencils from Tombow. So Danielle, I want you to choose 4 questions. If you will click through where it says answered underneath. Yeah. Okay. So if you'll just name people off, and we will give those away. We'll let Tombow know that these are your favorite questions. So, and I will contact you guys. So you mentioned you want to change any of your, go ahead. Just tell me the names.
Carly is great. That was a great first question and several great questions from her. Thank you so much. Let me see here. Erica, that was a great question about like trying new things. Definitely appreciate it. Miss Jojo for taking care of your hands. I'm all about that life. And Heather, that was lovely.
Great. So Carly, Heather, Erica, and Miss Jojo, thank you so much for asking the questions. If you're not in Canada or the US, please let us know. But from what I've seen, I think you're all in the US. So thank you so much, Danielle. So I have one question for you. The question is about readability. So like the piñata that's behind you, when you're working with materials, there is, even when you're working with brush pens or whatnot, we're usually working with tools that allow us to play with the thick and thins of letter forms, that allow us to self-kern. Some of the materials that you work with don't allow you to kern so well. Or, for example, like the shrimp piece that you showed, there is dark red in certain terminals of the shrimp. I can't believe I just said that word, the terminals of the shrimp, that allow us to see those parts of the letter forms more so than others. This is so hard.
No, right?
How do you work? And I'm just saying it, and you're the one who's doing it. So how do you work with readability with physical objects?
It changes based on the application. So I've kind of developed, I think, 2 different applications. I've developed either what I would call a clustering or some sort of like almost a cornucopia in a way, where people throw a bunch of materials at you and they go throw all of these into a thing. You have to start editing down via, for example, color. So in that regard, like I had to do a summer piece for Geico. They ended up nixing it, but it was with sandals and popsicles and marshmallows and candy and just every kind of summer fun noodles, anything you could think of. And so I was like, okay, we're going to edit this down to red, white, and blue, period. Like we'll do red all in one spot. We'll do the white underneath and we'll do the blue. So we'll have like a gradient. And they were like, cool, we can make that work. And so in that regard, playing around, you're looking for exact sizes of things. So when people go completely nuts and they go for a bunch of prop stylists and the stylists go out and they source everything and it's just this wild grab bag, like tables and tables of stuff, I will go looking, like scanning down the aisles, and I will pull out the exact bowl. I will pull out the exact counter, the exact leg, whatever it is. I will see it and I will grab it. It almost sounds like pretentious to be like, I'm like Michelangelo and I see it in the block of cheese. Mm-hmm. But like, it's kind of like, it is very much that way where, like this past weekend, I was just going through French fries just going through French fries, going through pieces of bacon. I'm like, not that one. I want the really wiggly one. And the stylists are like, but that one isn't camera ready. I'm like, that one's my camera ready. Give that to me. You know, it's very silly. It's just very strange because in a lot of ways you'll find that the things that people think are stylish, like the perfect shape of something, is actually not what you want. You want the kind of funny, awkward, the shape with a great personality, basically. Hey, that's sometimes great. That's exactly the stroke you're looking for, and it's beautiful that nature allows for that, and it kind of provides that genius for you, so that you don't really have to think as hard. I guess what I do is it's almost very minimal, or I do very little of the work. I think really the environment around me is cultivating the perfect everything all the time. And I just have to be there at the right moment to see it or to catch it or capture it. And I think there are some times where people will ask me to kind of, oh, this shrimp is a very specific size. Could you kind of knock a little note out of it? Well, then it has to look very natural. Yes. You know, it's something where I'm not going to cut a perfect hard line or angle. It's going to be more organic so that it still feels very much like the thing it is. And I think that's also, again, showing respect to the items I'm using. But also with the shrimp, there was very little that I could offer that wasn't very round and kind of like a sloppy humanist face. I mean, there really was there wasn't really anything else it was going to give me. And so I just had to go with it. And thankfully it was fine, but I was prepared to pile things up. And then you have those standard, you're using one thing, maybe two things, and they're all kind of the same texture and the same visual texture. And so when they are the same, it's much, much easier to come up with proper shapes because you can increase or decrease the scale always. But I'm thinking of things always in scale as someone might think of a pixel, and that being 1 point. I'm thinking of the smallest M&M. Right. Is the smallest pixel, the smallest button, the smallest bubble. It's all trying to figure out what that then looks like. And it's tricky because then you start realizing some of these pieces get into very large scale at 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet wide on the ground. Mm-hmm. It gets kind of crazy. Well, thank you. All of it's done here.
And I'm so happy that you do this work because it's inspired all of us. And I really appreciate the fact that you are putting this stuff out, and it's so beautiful. I mean, gosh, I wouldn't have known about your work unless you've not put it out there. So, but thank you so much for the great work, and thank you all for joining us and hanging out for an hour and a half talking about. Who doesn't want to talk about food, but lettering and food? So great. Well, also thank you to Tombo, and thank you again. Thank you so much for Tombo for giving us these things and allowing our group to interact with you. Thank you, Danielle. So, yay, glad. Well, have a good day, guys. Don't forget, in 2 weeks, we have Matt Vergotis. And then also, if you're interested, I'm just going to paste this in here. If you're interested in who else is coming down the queue, we also have Thomas Finney, James Sue, and Stephen Heller is going to be on, a couple other people. So yeah, it should be fun. But if you want to help us plan, if you want to help me plan, and yeah, let me know who else you would love to see in the dojo. We're just going to reach out, and I just say, what the hell? Let's see who comes on. But Danielle, again, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Have a good day, and we'll be watching the Instagram.
Of course. Take care, guys.
Okay. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.